All right, so let's go a little bit further with these cells. And what I want to do is introduce you to blobs. What are blobs? Well, let's go to Add Item, and from the Volumes category, let's choose Blob. Now, blob, very similar to a volume or a sprite, is basically a blob. It's not as soft as a sprite, but it reacts very much the same way. So, for instance, here's the blob, and if we look down under the geometry category for it, particle source. Oh, just like before, we can choose the particle cloud. So now, each one of those blobs can be attached to each one of those particles. And just like we did with the sprites, we can size these down. So not only can you have sprites in your scene, you can also have blobs attached to those same ones. Now, it could be a very interesting look for you if you're developing some kind of DNA structure and you want to create sort of a glow around it. You can put the sprites along with the blobs. But you can also create a separate particle group. So let's do this. Let's turn off this particle cloud. All right, and for this first particle cloud, we're going to call this sprite parts. Okay. Add item, particles, another particle cloud, and this one, of course, will be blob particles. And you can see it down here in the interface, in the layout. Let's just bring it down here, and let's press R for scale. We'll scale that up and back. Then we'll take the blob, and we'll attach the blobs to the blob particles. And that way we get them back there. Then we're going to increase the radius. And what will happen as we increase the radius, what's cool about blobs, is that they actually start blending together. Now you can put a hypertexture bump on there. We can play with that surface level a little bit, just so it kind of fattens them up. But what I like, of course, just like everything else, is the random size. And really let's just crank that up. Really create some randomization in there. And then we can play with the radius some more. So what can you do with these blobs? Well, of course I'm mixing them in with these awful looking cells. But we can make them into water, perhaps. We can make them into liquid to some degree. Now, if you have real flow, and you're one of the wealthy people that have it, I don't, you can add in from the particles category, real flow particles. Now, if you're not familiar with real flow, what real flow is a wonderful particle simulator. I used to use it years ago, and then it got famous and expensive, and I can't afford it anymore. Real flow people. And it will generate animated particles. You can bring that data in and then attach these blobs to it and render them out. Well, I'm going to do something kind of similar, but on its own. Let's go ahead and take this scene a little bit further. This kind of cell look, this mold growth. And what I've got here is Cells version 1 that's loaded up. Same thing. We've got our sprites, and then now we've got our blobs. So what I'm actually going to do is the blob particles we did with a particle cloud. Let's go to a particle generator, kind of what I showed you a little bit earlier. And let's just right click on these blob particles and delete them so we have just a generator. And I'm going to press the W command and we're going to move that generator back a little bit. Kind of like that. So for the particle generator, I actually just want them on the X this time. So I don't want any counts of particles on the Y or on the Z. Because what we're going to try and do is just create just more of a algae or even an animal inside there, something microscopic. Now the length is set to 1 meter. I'm going to leave that alone for the time being. So here's our blob, and the particle source then would be our particle generator. And we can even just come in here and say, this is blob particles, like that, just so we know. Now set to array, I actually want this more linear. And now you can see that I've got those nice linear particles right there, just kind of shooting off to the side. So it's not quite the angle I want, and I want them a little bit closer. So the first thing I'm going to do is go back to the blob, and what you can do here is actually play with the radius of these, because I want these to actually kind of blend into each other. Okay, you can do a little bit of randomization, and we've only got a count of 4, so it's not going to be too difficult to line these up. Let's go over here to blob parts, and let's just, with our E command for rotate, let's rotate these down. And then press W and we'll move them over. Okay. And let's see where our camera is. Where is our camera? Press the O command. Show cameras. So what I want to do is actually make these more parallel to the camera. So let's just rotate like this. then we can actually scale this, and we'll bring these in closer. Kind of like that. And then we'll move them in, move them back. And now we can go back to our blob itself, and we can increase the radius so that they blend in together, kind of like that. And then maybe even a little more randomization. And then we can go back perhaps to the blob particles themselves, put a few more counts on. We could punch in just maybe 7. All right, so we've just got this kind of weird little blobby thing in here. Now, on its own, it doesn't look like much, but let's go ahead and put some shading on there. So if we go to the shader tree, open up render, you're going to see that there's actually no material for it. So we have to create that. So in the items tab, for the blob, right-click on it and choose create item mask. And now we've got a material group that we can apply to the blobs. So from the material, let's go ahead and add some procedurals to it. And under textures, we can add noise or ripples or waves. I think I'm just going to use noise for the time being. Now, the noise on its own is probably going to be a little bit too big. It defaults at 1 meter. But what I really want to do is right-click on the effect and change that effect of the noise to a bump map. And then let's take the scale down. And so if my grid is 500 millimeters, I want to make this bump map quite small so we can see it. Now I can see it on there, but it's not quite as strong as I want. So I'm going to go back here to the material for the blob. And at the bottom of the shader, you can see bump amplitude is set to 5 millimeters. Let's change it to 50 millimeters. Aha, much better. All right, so now we have this kind of weird little thing going on back there, some kind of growth. But I don't necessarily want it so solid. I actually want to keep it a little bit more, well, microscopic, if you would. Okay, and remember that we can change the animation values for the bump maps for the blob itself as we're moving along. Now I'm going to save this as version 2, save incremental, so you can load up version 1. So back in the material, let's go to material trans for the transmissive. And what we're going to do with this is use our subsurface scattering. And what subsurface scattering is it allows the light to transmit through the surface. So in this case, now it's not going to look like too much is happening simply because we have the light in front of it. So imagine a leaf on a tree. Well, if you hold up the leaf and throw a light on it, it doesn't look like anything more than just a leaf. It's solid. If you put the light behind it, however, it becomes translucent. The light permeates through, kind of like skin on your ear or the membranes between your fingers, that thin film. When the light actually is behind it and you're looking through it, you get that effect. Well, I don't mind my light where it is, but for the actual particles themselves, it probably won't matter. So if we make sure our show lights is on, we press the O command to get that panel. And we select the light, and let's just rotate it. Remember, a directional light, the position doesn't matter. Two things are going to happen. The particles kind of lose their way because, well, we're lighting it from the front. So what we want to do then is just go to Items, and we are going to rename this Particle Light. Now I'm going to go to Add Item, and this time we're going to take a light that is a little more controllable, like a point light or perhaps a spotlight. Okay, and what the spotlight's going to allow us to do is really get that targeted to just those blobs. So you can see it puts it right down the z-axis, just points it right down there. So we're actually going to rotate it around 180 degrees like that. And we're going to move behind our blob. Okay, and then here you can see that the cells are being affected by it, but once we get it back here far enough, we're not going to have to worry about it too much, because then our front light is actually still lighting our cells like we want. And if you ever want to know what the light sees, go here to Perspective and then click on that and change it to whatever light you want. In this case, a spotlight. So now I can see exactly where that spotlight is hitting. So perhaps I want to come over here a little bit. And I want to rotate, something like that. Okay, I'll know that I'm hitting just those. Now for the blob itself, it's blended in with the particles, and that's okay, but I'm actually going to move it back just a little bit. The blob and the particles themselves. Just going to get those back there a little bit. So now let's do this. Let's go back to the particle light. I want this light to actually fall off a little bit. And it's really kind of hard to do with the directional light because it's always there. So want to change this particle light from a directional light to a spotlight. So we're going to right click on it and hit change type also to a spotlight. And when I do that, you can see that now I have a fall off type, and you can actually see the whole look of this changes. Well, the default is inverse distance squared, which is what we use in our photography studio every once in a while. So the inverse square law means this. If you take the power of the light, it'll be inversely proportional to the square of the distance. What does that mean? Well, if you take the distance of 2 and square it, you get 4. The inverse of which would be a quarter of the power. Okay? Not half. So what that means is basically, well, the light's going to fall off if we double the distance. A quarter of the power. All right? So what I'm going to really do is just play with the radiant value. So now I can increase this. I have to give it more power because it's falling off. But that gives us a lot more control over the look of this, which is really cool. Because then I can actually be moving the camera and I can be animating the radiant intensity. But you can see that I'm not actually hitting my blob all the way. And if I want to get that blob out of the way some more, I can take the blob and the blob particles and just move them back just a little bit out of that light source, which is great because now I can get that silhouette look I want. So then we go back to this rear spotlight, and let's just look at it like this. Spotlight. All right, so here's what our spotlight sees, and I can just very easily move this around and hit those blobs from the side or from the back, which is kind of cool. And if I press my Alt or Option key, Mac or PC, and then my Command key, I can actually rotate like this. And again, remember, I'm looking through the spotlight. Now, our current spotlight also has the inverse square law, so let's just turn that off and see what happens. Notice that it hits the particles, okay? So it's something we need to be aware of. It actually hits them right over here. That's what you're seeing. But we also need to make sure that it hits our blob as well. So if I increase the radiance value, you can actually see it hitting the back side of that blob right there. Let me push it way up. See that? And I'll zoom in. So there's our spotlight hitting the back of this. I'm going to push my light in just a little bit on these, and I'm actually going to move it over. And again, remember, I'm looking through the spotlight. So when I move this view, it's not perspective view, it's a spotlight view. And I'm going to rotate it, if I can, like this. Alt, Option, and the Command key. Try Control on the PC. And I'm just pointing it down the side of these little blobs here so I don't hit the particles over here. Now remember that this default spotlight that I've put in also has inverse square applied as a default. So I need to either turn that off or just increase the radiant intensity. Okay, and now I can see the light hitting that blob. All right, but it doesn't look like much. So let's go back to the blob material. Now let's go to Material Trans, and I want to increase the transparency. So we don't need it full transparent, but notice now how the light's starting to come through. Well, if you look at the subsurface color, I just put a red on here. You can put it like green or whatever you want. The subsurface scattering has that light just kind of bleeding through that material. And I can increase or decrease the distance here, and let's just make this even brighter so you can see it. Okay, so now because the object's transparent, the light is actually pushing through, and it has not quite a transparent look, but a subsurface look. Now, you can play with these values, play with the front weighting, and that will actually pull it back a little bit. Probably wouldn't go negative. Let's keep it like about 10%. And if you go the other way, you actually see it kind of fade off towards the edges a little. Okay, so that's the subsurface scattering with that light pushing through there. And you can play around with the light coming behind it, from the top, or even underneath. But essentially, you want it on the side or kind of behind to get that look. So if we go back to the items here, and we choose blob, and now we come down to the radius and the random size, we can adjust those as well just to give it a unique kind of look. But we can also animate the hypertexture and the surface level. I mentioned those earlier, but I didn't get to show you what they do. If I increase the hypertexture amplitude, this texture now that gets put on these blobs increases the size of them. And if I play at the surface level, well, now I've got the blobs kind of growing, mixed with the bump map that I've put on. Okay? So just a cool way to animate and set these up. So let's do that. Let's just set up a little animation here. So I'm going to zero this out, and I'm going to zero this out. just kind of like that. So we have basically going to show this like little weird, strange growth. And as I do this, I'm going to come back to material trans, and of course, if it's a weird growth, it has to be green. There we go. So I'm going to save this scene as version 2, save incremental, and this will be version 3. Here we are in the render tab. We also have our animate line down here, an animation line. 4 seconds is fine. So what we want to do is set up our camera. Let's do that first. So here's our camera. All right, let's select it in the items tab. Here's our camera. Press the Y command if you want. Y command works. And you can keyframe just the position or keyframe everything. We're only really going to be pulling it back on the Z, but one thing that's safe to do is press Shift Y. And what Shift Y does is creates a keyframe for all of the transition channels. Scale, rotation, and position. Transform channels, not transition. Okay. And then here at frame 20, let's decide where that camera will be. And notice when I go to frame 20, all of those channels turn green. Green means those channels are animated. And you can hold your mouse over and see the legend. So let's pull that back like that, not too far. And maybe even let's twist it a bit, kind of like that. Still keeping that blob in play. You can move it a little bit. And this is actually why I like to animate all the channels. Just because in case I decide to move something later, it'll still fit. Okay, so I just set a new position at 120. What that means is at 0 we're here, and then at 120 we've just kind of pulled out very slowly, very slight, and we've just rotated a bit. Not very much. And maybe if I want to change frame 0, I can just zoom in some more, like this. And of course you can reverse this. Maybe you want to start out and then zoom in, but you get the idea that we can just animate those values. So back at frame 0, let's take the blob itself and create some keyframes. We're not going to really move it. We're just going to play with the hypertexture. So let's create keys for the hypertexture amplitude and surface level by clicking the red dots. Blob is selected. And then let's just move it up to about 1 second. And let's increase the surface level like that. That might be a little fast, but we'll try it. And then you can see as we pull out, that blob is now animating. And then maybe up here a little bit, let's play with the hypertexture amplitude. And if you go negative, you know, we could push that down. You can see them scale in, or we can just scale it kind of up fat, whatever we want. And so now that value is animated. And so now what we've done is started out at 0 with this little kind of green growth. We've moved the camera back through our sprites, through the blobs, and we've watched that little science membrane thing grow. Okay, not very accurate science, but hopefully you that knows a little bit more about the science value of what things should look like under a microscope can build upon this and create a really cool effect. Okay, and here's just a cheesy little render, just showing you how the little quick setup we did. You can start seeing everything moving in there. Now, of course, it can be a lot more intricate. We can add some more blobs coming out this way and have this growth just kind of continuing on out of here, simply by just animating those channel values. So, subsurface scattering showing up, all the lights, all the sprites, works out pretty well. And what we want to do is build some teeth and some plaque, and we're going to put these particles across there. So in order of time, I'm not going to actually build the teeth. I'm just going to load them up. And once we load them up, I'm actually going to show you, we're going to take a little detour, and we're going to go over to the paint category, and I'm going to show you how to put plaque on these teeth, but we're going to do it with a weight map. Let's jump over to the File menu, and from Open, let's jump into your Scenes folder and choose Teeth. Okay, and it's just a few teeth I've set up with some simple gums. Jump to the render tab, you can see it. Now the scene's not lit, so what I'm going to do is incorporate our lighting into here. These are really small teeth. They're not accurate at all. But I'm going to come down to the camera, choose Display. Let's set this at 0. And then we'll do the same for the light. In this course, our other courses we actually had a full lighting section, and I'm actually just been incorporating lighting into our scenes. And if you look at the quick start video for newbies, that actually has some good lighting in there. And I'm going to set up another type of lighting here. And, not only does it help us expedite, it also allows us to just show you a little bit more realistic setup rather than just, this is this light, this is this light. But here is our default light. It is a directional light. Okay, so its position doesn't matter, only its rotation. So it's way over here, but I can rotate it as long as my camera is not selected and my jaw. Okay, so something to be careful of. What just happened is that I actually had two items selected here, and I'm in item mode. So when I was rotating my jaw, I was also rotating the light. I just want the light by itself. Let's try that again. So I press the Y command. Aha. All right, so now we can turn the light around. Well, we don't want to light it like that. I really just want to just kind of blow some light in like that on these teeth. Somewhat nice like that. And we don't want too much of a heavy shadow. So what we're going to do is jump over to the shader tree. And then from the environment, let's open that up. And in the environment material, in the properties, we have a color gradient, just, this white to gray. Let's make it a little bit more dental, a little more attractive. So the nadir color, we're going to create a deep blue. And then we're going to do somewhat of a kind of a medium blue there, a little nicer. And to save this, I'm going to take this little square here and I'm going to drop it in. Now, if you're on a Windows system, however you save your colors, you can do it the exact same way. Just save it to one of your presets, whichever your color palette comes up. And for the sky color, I actually just chose the exact same one. That eliminates any kind of horizon line. And then the sky itself could stay white. I can squeeze down the sky and squeeze the ground as well, because we're looking at a really tight area there, so you're not going to see a lot. But just by squeezing, we get a little bit more definition there of that gradient. And in fact, we can even spread this one out a little bit. This way, if we rotate around, which we don't really intend to, we get a little bit more sky up there. But the next thing we do under the render is choose Global Illumination and Enable. And it's going to bounce that nice soft blue area onto our teeth. So just gives us a very kind of clinical look. It softens the shadows and looks really good for what we're going to do. I'm going to go back over here to my light. So we got item mode, okay, and we'll turn off our existing tool and then select the light. Now what I want to do with the light itself is I just want to soften that shadow. So that's the spread angle right here. And often about 20 degrees is all you need. And those shadows inside the teeth now are just a little bit softer. Okay, so you don't need to use big area lights all the time. Let me turn this off and just show you exactly. So there's 0. You got hard shadows coming through those teeth. Instead, bring it about 20, well, not that much, just about 20 degrees, and it just softens in there. It takes a little bit longer to render, but just gives us a little bit more realism. Now the teeth are really chunky. They're just junky teeth. I just wanted to show you. They're not the greatest models in the world. However, there's a reason for that. I'm not going to do it, but you can. If you jump back to our topology course, well, remember I talked about bringing in some crummy models? Look at these. See all those triangles in there? Well, perfect opportunity to get into the topology tab and rebuild these. Okay, these are some just old chunky teeth I had from years ago that I had copied in and modified and just left them like that. Now you can do two things here to clean these up. What's happening here, all this kind of bumpiness, it's because of these triangles. Okay, so I can double click on an angle and then hit the remove button. And that can work, but it can kind of be a pain really. And you can start really screwing things up. So then you got to manually go in and select just the diagonals you want, leaving those 4 quad meshes. Or you can try this. Go to select, and then down in the menu there is diagonal. And just leave the defaults. Click OK, and Modo does a pretty good job of selecting diagonals. You can play with some of those values if you want, and then delete those just at the backspace key. But for the most part, you're either going to have to manually clean these up or go into the topology tab. So take a look at that tutorial again. Use these teeth as an example. Okay, so yeah, one at a time you'd have to do those. All right. Let's go back over here to render. Now the other thing I want to show you, see, we're doing multiple things in this one tutorial. is that I don't like this gum sticking out over here. Okay, I'd cut it off of something else, and I purposely left it there because I want to show you, and don't worry about these roots sticking out. Everybody's teeth looks like that, don't they? I want to talk about a selection method. Now, we've been using the T key, which is element move. It's this transform command right there. And with the right mouse, we can set a range that we want to grab, and we can just click on an element and drag it like an edge like that. Okay, but there's something else called soft selections in here. So let's say I take a couple of polygons like this. Under the fall off, I can choose soft selection. And the right mouse, I can increase my radius as well, but I'll press W, and then let me just scale this down. W is my transform command. And what you're going to see is where this fall off will happen on this soft selection. So then I can actually move this around. But notice I get exactly the movement to the end of this radius that I set. And again, the right mouse sets that radius, or right here, the soft selection fall off. Okay, and you can use connectivity. It's great if you've got something like some polygons that are close and adjoining. You can turn that on or off. So just might not be the best tool for this. I just wanted to show you that that is a great way to actually move some geometry around, and a tool we have not yet used. Okay, so feel free to do that. And I just moved mine out of the way. I'm going to save this incrementally so I don't save over my existing one. So to get the plaque on here, how do we do that? Well, it's really pretty simple. And what I'm going to do is open up the shader tree. You can see I've got my skull, which actually really is just called gums. We'll say yes. And then the lower teeth, we got the basic white material. But we want to put some plaque on there. And I'm going to do that with some noise. So image map, processing, we're going down to textures and then noise. Okay, and you can see some noise automatically come on there. What I like to do with the noise is always keep it at diffuse color initially, leave it black and white, and then go to texture locator, click my gang select, and just scale that down until it's a little bit smaller, so we get a little bit more of that noise in there. But make sure you don't go negative like I just did. And again, these are really small teeth. They shouldn't be this small. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Now go back to the color, and then we'll give it some plaque color. And depending on who you're doing this for, they may want more or less, but we're just going to stain the teeth like that. You can then right-click on this and duplicate it and make it a bump map, but we're not going to worry about it too much right now. I'll save this. Well, that's great, but I really want the plaque concentrated more down here. So how would I do that? Well, I could go in and try working with all different gradients, but maybe create UV maps for everything. It's really kind of a pain. And what I found doing this is the best way was with weight maps. So if we go over here to this Animate tab, remember earlier I showed you with the joints how we had weighting and we could paint those? Well, you could do the same on teeth. You don't have to keep that just for skeletons and joints. Well, how do you do that? Well, under Items, we're going to select the jaw. Okay. And I might need these teeth on a separate layer, so let's make sure though. Yeah, it's all one. Let's just try this. We want to create a weight map for the teeth. So what I'm going to do is actually just take this, I keep calling it jaw, but it's actually gum now. Okay, I'll press the H key. That hides it. Didn't delete it, just hit it. Now, from the weight maps, we're going to select New, and I'll call this Teeth Weight. And click OK. So now we actually have a weight map that we're working with. It's going to apply to the vertices of all this. Now we can go ahead and simply paint, but what's going to be easier is to actually just like cover the whole thing and then erase. So I'm going to hit Adjust Weights, and then I'm just going to kind of click right in here. But I want to be able to see my weights, so press the O on your keyboard and make sure Show Weight Maps is on. And you'll see that there's the weight map I just applied. Let me undo, and I'll do it again. So click and drag, and now I have weight maps over the whole. Now press the U on the keyboard, and we unhide our gums. So now we know that weight map is only on those teeth, so that's good. And we're going to Command or Control S to save. So now, back to erase, right mouse creates a little bit of a brush, and all I'm going to do is erase away where I don't want the plaque. So even though we do want some on the top of the teeth, we're just going to, kind of go like that. We just want to really concentrate it along the bottoms. And you can get in there really small if you want. Just zoom in, kind of do that. And let's say, though, your client comes in and says, well, there needs to be some back in these grooves. No problem. Just select the paint, and then let's just paint some in. So now we can actually paint this weight map into these grooves, and this is exactly where the plaque will be applied. So it makes it really, really good to... I say really a lot, don't I? It makes it excellent. I'll say that. Okay. I'll tell you, I wish I had this tool about 3 years ago. Could have saved me a couple of months' worth of work. But anyway, you get the idea. We can very easily create a weight map in here just by painting it. And the other thing you can do with this weight map, the way we're going to do this, is just any texture you want you can apply in here. So if you want decay or something else, certainly you could paint the decay in here too. This just gives us kind of a little more flexibility. All right, so we're painting where we're going to put our plaque. And then, of course, we can erase and we can smooth and do all kinds of things. So if we choose smooth, same kind of thing. You can smooth that out. And you can see it just softens it, so it'll drift up there more. Now, it's working pretty well on my laptop. I did this yesterday with a bigger scene, actually a whole mouth, and it was pretty chunky to do. So on a few teeth like this, it works pretty well. So you might want to break up your scene. All right, so get the idea? Okay, good. And actually, one more thing. Take a noise brush, right, as this eraser, and I can, that's probably a little too much. But with this noise brush, I can either paint or erase. So don't forget that's kind of an option too. So let's jump back over to the render. We're going to save the scene. And let's try and make our diffuse color just a little bit stronger here. You can play with the values, but that's not going to change much. I just want to actually just even stronger color in here, just so we can really see that stain. All right, so how do we do this? Well, what we want to do is add a layer to this noise layer. And what we're going to do is come down to Special, Processing, Weight Map Texture. All right. Now, look at that. That's the weight map we just applied. Not quite exactly like we want, but it's kind of working. For the diffuse color, I can right-click on that and change it to any of the parameters I want. But how do I apply it to this? Well, all I'm going to do first is take this weight map and drag it on top of the noise. And look what happens. The weight map that I painted now is applied onto the teeth, and only those areas that I painted are showing the plaque. Okay, I instantly created a mask. And if you look at the top here, there's the paint I applied inside there. And now that I look at the top, I have to go back to my light because my light is a little bit hot. I'm going to bring the light down. There we go. Now we got some nice stains in there. And of course you can still add general painting to the teeth, or you can go in and adjust that weight map and adjust that plaque. All right, so that's step one. The next part is to add our blob. So I'm going to add item, particle cloud. Okay, let's go ahead and set up the particle cloud where we want it to live. And it's probably going to be huge in our scene because I got these teeth that are just so tiny. And I brought these teeth in from a whole nother scene. I just gave you a portion of it. But I'm scaling down, but particle cloud. And then I'm going to kind of flatten it out like that. And I said very beginning of the course that you should build things to scale, and I didn't do it with these. Because if you look, it's 20 millimeters is this teeth setup. And the reason for that is that when you get really small, things kind of get hard to manipulate. So avoid that. An object in your scene is bigger than it is small. You hear me, Ron Thornton? Are you listening? Better be. Mr. Tiny Spaceship Man. Okay. So I'm just positioning these little particles where I want them. Okay. And that's fine. Because what we're going to do is have the saliva come in and wash away. Or fluid or mouthwash or whatever we want to call it. Save my scene. And let me save as a version. Save incremental. And then we're going to add item. Volumes. Come on. There it goes. Blob. Okay. And then the particle source for the blob is our particle cloud. Now what's that? Oh my god. They're just really huge. Don't freak out. Bring that radius down 500 down all the way to about 5 millimeters. Something like that. Okay, let's take a look at the render. See our blobs over our plaque. Well, let's jump here and let's scale these blobs just a little bit. So with the blob selected, let's just bring the radius down a little bit more. There we go. And what I want to do to get these things a little more liquid-like is increase the random size. And if we do that, we might have to then adjust the radius as well. And then we can go into the particle cloud and adjust the scaling in there too. And so a combination of each one of these settings will help us just create the look we're after. There we go. See, I'm just kind of shrinking that down so it's more of a cluster. And then we can go back to the blob itself. And let's bring the radius down. Now I had shaped this. Let's bring this to view here. By stretching it. And I might have stretched it a little too far. So let's make sure that that blob is selected. Go to item mode. There we go. And let's just kind of round those out just a bit. And then let's rotate it. So essentially what we're doing is just creating kind of a clump of fluid. And as I'd mentioned, you can't necessarily animate these individual particles like they're flowing, but a combination of sizing them and placing them with the right radius and the right blending and having them move across will create that nice kind of look we're after. Alright, so it's looking pretty good, but let's put some shading on there. So if we go over to the render and we take a look here, here's lower teeth and gums, but I have nothing for the blob. So again, we're going to right click on the blob, create an item mask, and then under the shader tree there's our new material group. Well, we want this a little more liquid like, so here's how we can make some liquid. We're going to take the diffuse value down to 0, essentially telling it don't take any light from the scene. Specularity is going to be very low, as will the roughness, so 5% on each of those. Then we want a little bit of reflection, so I'm going to say about 20% will be good. Then, in the material trans category, we're going to make it 100% transparent. And we'll start getting that liquid look. But the trick to this is to actually create a refraction. So glass is about 1.44. We're going to go like 1.2. It's not necessarily glass. And then the trick is with this transparent color, we're going to make that kind of just a tinted blue like that. And we're going to increase the absorption distance. And this is like a transparent thickness, and it'll push that color out to the edges and give us that liquidy effect we're after. Okay, and again, we're just doing kind of a generic kind of liquid, bubbles, toothpaste, whatever. All of which we could do with these blobs. And okay, I just did something which you got to be careful of. In this bottom view, earlier I was showing you this is what our light is looking through, and I'm assuming it's a perspective view, so when I started rotating around, I actually was rotating my light, and I changed my scene, so just something to be aware of. Alright, so we've got that looking pretty good. So all we really want to do now is take this blob and just animate it. So with the blob selected in the Items tab, what we can do is then in our Render tab down here at the bottom, I'm going to press the Y command for the blob. It's our main transform. And let's hit key, like that. And you can see a little keyframe is made right there. And I'm just going to move this, and actually make sure you grab the particles too. Let's put those like both of a key, like that. And then we're going to move them back this way. Okay, so that's frame 0. And because auto key is set to animated, they're going to stay in place. And then again, we'll just do a 4-second wash. I'm going to pull this back out. And then we are going to push these over like this. And then I'm going to rotate them like that. But then I'm going to take just the blob itself and rotate those so that those are spinning independently. Then the next phase would be to fade this off. And this is kind of an old school trick we used to do all the time. You don't have to worry about a wipe or anything because this is happening over just 4 seconds. So really, right about here, I'm just dragging the timeline, clicking and dragging at the timeline to see our animation. So right about frame 50, everything comes into play. So that's where we could start our fade. What are we going to fade? We're going to fade the plaque on those teeth. Let's open up that texture. And really, we have this map here. Now, if we take the map off, you can see that it just goes away. So all we really want to do is fade the opacity. So here's how we're going to do it. Here's the opacity right here. It's 100%, meaning that mask showing the plaque is full speed ahead. So at frame 50, we're going to create a key that is 100%. We're also going to go at 0 and create a key at 100%. The reason we're doing that is because when you create an animation, you want to make sure that if something's going to happen at some point later in time, you want it to be able to stay still, not change up until that point. So we need to create a keyframe at 0 saying the plaque is 100% opaque at frame 0, and then at frame 50, it's also 100%. And then as those bubbles kind of come across right about here, frame 72, this is going to be 0. And you can see it right there. So what's going to happen then is we've got full-on plaque. And then I'm just going to click in the timeline and drag. And we'll slowly go through so our preview render shows. Plaque is still on. Here comes our mouthwash, our saliva, whatever we want it to be. And notice that as it goes across, that plaque just fades away. That easy. So the last thing I would do is probably come here to the camera itself in the items tab and open up the transform, and let's just select the position, hold the shift key, and then click the Z. A lot of people don't realize you can click outside here to select those channels. And then I'm going to hit the key to create a key for the transform channels there. And then at frame 120, all we're going to do is just kind of zoom in a little bit. That's it. That's all I have to do. And again, the reason that zoom in works and keyframes automatically is because auto key is set to animated. So we have frame 0. The blobs come in with the particles and wash away the plaque. Okay, so I'll save this scene. This is version 4 of the teeth. You can load this up and modify it as you like. This is going to end this particular video. Went on really long because we had all these different things to put in. But essentially you can see that by using particles, we can create sprites and create organic type microscope effects. We can have blobs blend together to create liquid or to make them look also microscopic. And then combining those with camera movements and lighting, we can create a really neat animation. So let's move on to the next phase where we're going to do some more kind of science stuff, but I'm going to use fur and fiber to create something a little bit different than you might think.